So tell us, Alex, what's up with the resource API?
What resource API? It doesn't exist. No. I think we have to HackMD, honestly.
Oh, we love the HackMD. For those of us who just haven't had a chance to look at it, what is going on with the resource API that everybody's talking about this week? And also, thank you for joining us. We love you. And thank you to our sponsors, AG Grid, for helping us have these cool discussions. So tell us, Alex, what's up with the resource API?
What resource API? It doesn't exist. No. I think we have to HackMD, honestly.
Oh, we love the HackMD.
Because that's just the I think that the best way to explain some of these things is just to actually dive into it. Yeah, so resource and the kind of partner API, RX resource, are new experimental APIs in Angular v19. And everyone focuses on the resource function. But I'm actually more excited about the resource type. I just want to start with that little teaser, and we'll get into why that is. But first of all, like, what is resource? And I think that the best way to explain this is to talk about like what we already do today with computeds, right? So if you have, the typical signal example of like a counter, and you say, well, like, I want to know, double count or is even, right? Is computed of like, count modulo 2 is 0, right? Is it divisible by 2 or not? So this is the typical way of writing like counter and then like some computed property that depends on the counter. And the thing we love about signals, right, is it's very clear here that like count is what I would call like primary state. It's state that can change. We can set the count if we want to. We can update it based on the old version of itself. And we know that is even will just kind of follow along because that's how signals work. When the primary sources change, the computeds they're always correct, right? And we didn't have to write any code or logic to keep these things in sync. All we had to do is kind of declare the relationship, right? We declared that is even is always the result of this expression, and then Angular takes care of running that in the background whenever we need to. So it's that really like you are not talking about the data in terms of how you want it to update. You are talking about is even in terms of what it means, right? All you have to do is declare what this thing represents, and the updating is kind of handled for you behind the scenes. And resource is kind of a similar idea, but for asynchronous operations. So I would call it like it's almost an async computed, but it's a slightly different concept there. So with resource, let's say, I will say is valid, right? Let's say we have some backend API that's like is valid of the count 1, 2, 3 or something like that. Maybe we have limits on how high or low the count can go. And we want to be able to read the value of or the validity status of the current count. And we can't really do this with computed because computed expects that we return a result immediately, right? We're going to read the count signal, calculate something based on that, and then that becomes the new value of the is even signal. So we need to make a network request that's fundamentally an asynchronous thing. We need to we need to kind of wait for that to complete, and then we will know the valid status. And we could do this kind of traditionally, right, with a signal, and let's say it starts as false, and then we write an effect that's going to say, well, my URL is valid and the current count, right? So now we're reactive for the current count. We can make this an async method. We can result as await fetch the URL and like return result JSON, right? And then await that as well. Or wait, we can't return it. We have to is valid.set, right? So we can use effect to do this. And fundamentally, making a network request is an effect, right? It's something you want to happen in the real world outside of the signal graph in response to changing signals. But there's a few challenges with this. One is, of course, that is valid will be returning whatever the previous value was until we get to the new value, until the network request completes. But kind of more fundamentally, we're back in this land of like describing how we want to go about doing the operation of fetching the next value, right? Whereas with isEven, we had this nice API to say like, these are how these things are related. Now we're back in like, well, here's how to like manually propagate one thing to another. And like, we've lost that niceness of just declaring how the two things are related. And that is what the resource API is about. It's about declaring how an asynchronous thing relates to the rest of your signal state. And, and also kind of addressing the concern of, because this is an asynchronous request, right? It is going to be, it's going to take some time. And so we might want to know, in the UI, hey, is that data actually there yet? What's the state of our asynchronous operation? And so this is what resource does. So we can declare is valid is a resource, and the resource API gives us a request that we pass in, and the request is what's going to trigger the resource to go and update. So what does this asynchronous request depend on? And so in this case, it's actually I'm this dot because I'm using component syntax, but like I care about the counts, right? I want to track the count, and whenever that changes, I want to like recheck the validity status. And then you have the loader, which is this async function that gets a hold of the request, and it does the work of like going to the network stack and figuring out what the value is. So here's where we have our URL operation here, and return result.await. What am I writing? It's Rust. Result.json. Rust uses, instead of await x, it uses x.await, which is really like jarring to go back and forth between. So this is, a bit subtly different than the effect, right? But we're back in this realm of we're kind of declaring the input here, and we're declaring kind of how to produce the value. So instead of manually wiring this up to like an output signal, now the resource is taking care of kind of giving us is valid dot value. And this will just as if it were a computed, right, kind of be tracking the result of this asynchronous operation over time. And in fact, we can actually ask like, is valid is loading to know like, hey, is it ready yet? Like if your application is a kid and it's like waiting for you to get the data, it's like, is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? Yeah. So that's pretty much resource, right? It's a declarative way of describing how an asynchronous thing relates to the rest of the data in your application.
Does anybody have questions about this? Dominic?
Yeah, thank you. So it looks a bit like React Query, right? And
yeah, similar.
Yeah, and they have integrations with the routing, everything. And I wondered if this will also be integrated with the Angular router.
Dominic, you're playing right into my hands, man. I love it when the audience like gives the segue for you, right? Like, yeah. So I mentioned earlier, like I'm more excited by this than by the.